Thank you, one and all, for coming out today to hear about Agnes Varda and to see her latest film, Faces, Places. I'd like to thank the film curator of the National Gallery, Margaret Parsons, for inviting me. And also, I'd really like to thank the family of Rajiv Vaidya, who makes this annual lecture possible. I'm very honored to be here and to be thinking about a young man who loved cinema himself and who left us all too soon. Agnes Varda is an unusual filmmaker for many reasons. First of all, she became a filmmaker under unusual conditions. In the summer of 1954, while on a summer break from her job as a photographer at a theater, 26-year-old Agnes Varda started a production company. And she shot a feature-length fiction film called La Pointe Courte. She scraped together a small budget and enlisted the help of a few seasoned actors from the theater where she worked, the Théâtre National Populaire. And she also enlisted the help of first-time actors from a small village, a small neighborhood in the town of Sète, which is on the southern coast of France. It's not a chic kind of Mediterranean town like Saint-Tropez. It's a kind of fishing town, really. She spent the war years there with her family, and she came to know and love this town very well. So she decided to shoot a film there using the first-time actors of the fishermen who lived in this town. Much like William Faulkner's The Wild Palms, an acknowledged influence, the film she made weaves together two stories, a naturalistic story about fishermen and their families, and another highly stylized story about a Parisian couple in a troubled marriage. Unlike other filmmakers we associate with the New Wave, she was not a person who spent her childhood and adolescence immersed in cinema. Instead, she studied painting at the École du Louvre, the Louvre's school for curators. And she also became a photographer. She went to night school and got her certificate in photography. She was also a serious reader. She took a year off after she completed the equivalent of high school, and she lived with some girlfriends in an apartment near Pigalle, and she did little else but read modernist fiction for a year, the works of Virginia Woolf, John Dos Passos, William Faulkner, and many others. When she made her first film in 1954, she may not have been a critic like François Truffaut or a cinephile, but she was steeped in photography and painting and in modernist literature and in theater. She was also accustomed to thinking of herself as an artist and as a professional. So when her still images suddenly seemed too silent, she said, she decided to combine sound with moving images. And she made La Pointe Courte. La Pointe Courte is a very unusual combination of both neo-realist strategies. Here I'm thinking of the work of Rome Open City or Bicycle Thieves. It's a mélange of films like that, especially Visconti's La Terra Trema, with the modernist works of Antonioni, something like L'Avventura or Eclipse or A Voyage to Italy by Rossellini. So even though she had never seen any of these films, her first film seemed to bear these dual influences. People noticed, and they were interested in this film. It was seen and written about by the important critic André Bazin. But it didn't get a proper distribution because Varda had registered with the film authorities in Paris as a maker of short films. She did not have the cash to register as the maker of a feature-length film. And so she had to accept that and just let the film have the life that it could. It did have a life. It circulated in one art house theater in Paris and in the ciné clubs of France. It was shot 5 years before 400 Blows and Hiroshima Mon Amour, two films that are traditionally considered to have launched the new wave. So she demonstrated that one could make a compelling, low-budget film with a small and inexpensive crew, a film that could tell stories in a new way and that could be really audacious in its use of style. So she actually was a huge influence on the New Wave. She wasn't just part of the New Wave, as most people think. With her 1962 film, Cleo from 5 to 7, she actually helped inspire the New Wave. The making of this first film also established preoccupations that Varda would carry with her throughout her career. The impulse to tell a story about a highly distinctive place, a desire to mix the codes of fiction film and documentary, and a taste for narrative and stylistic experimentation. She's always trying new things. She followed up her feature fiction debut with 3 short documentary films before returning in 1962 to the making of fiction films with Cleo from 5 to 7. So the pattern was set, and this is another way in which she's unusual. She has regularly moved back and forth between the making of fiction films and the creation of documentary. She is therefore a hybrid artist, excelling at the documentary and the fiction film, the short and the long form, and moving nimbly between photography, film, and most recently, multimedia installations. Indeed, since 2003, she has been making installations. She started with a show at the Venice Biennale and has not stopped. Just as she managed the intricacies of the financing, production, and marketing of film as an outsider to the film world in 1955, she learned how to navigate the world of the art fair and the art gallery beginning in 2003. Now, today I would like to focus on Agnes Varda's work in documentary, since we will be viewing her latest, Faces, Places, or Visage, Village, later this afternoon. What are her aesthetic and rhetorical strategies in the making of documentary films? How has her work changed over time? How does her latest work fit into her artistic trajectory? These will be my questions. I'm going to identify 4 threads that seem to be woven through her practice. I'll start by talking about her early shorts and how they establish her interest in place and also play, a kind of playful approach to her topic, and also something I see in her documentary work that persists throughout her career is an intense interest in structure and pattern with a kind of playful willingness to digress. The second big stage is her work in California. She lived in California in the late 1960s and then again in the late 1970s. And here her work takes on a more politicized form. Beginning in 1982, she made a film called Ulysse, which initiates her habit of recycling and analyzing her own work. And finally, beginning in 2000 with The Gleaners and I, she enters a new period of autobiography, an intensification of her earlier autobiographical impulses. So after she made that first fiction feature, Varda made 3 short documentaries. 2 of the films, Aux Saisons, Au Château, and Du Côté de la Côte, were commissioned by the French Tourism Office. She was not particularly interested in the Loire Valley and the Riviera, the areas that she was supposed to sort of market, essentially, through the making of these films, but she was smart to follow the advice of her friend Alain René, the fellow filmmaker, who had advised her to enhance her professional profile by making shorts. It was not at all a shameful thing in 1957 to make short documentaries. It was a period of extraordinary innovation in the short form, partly because the French government was supporting the making of shorts, and it was kind of a laboratory for people to try things. So actually, she was able to try out some strategies. In Aux Saisons, Au Château, she provides an architectural history of the region's castles, but also throws in some unexpected elements.
On construit des enceintes avec des tours à bec comme à Loches, des tours rondes comme à Chinon, comme à Montrésor. forteresse d'Angers voit se succéder foule que le bon, foule que le noir, foule que le chagrin.
So, alongside the authoritative architectural history are models in haute couture dresses, because why not? Jazz and poetry on the soundtrack, and considerable attention paid to the castle gardeners and caretakers. She interviews them and has them identify trees on the grounds of the castles. Such elements serve as both a gentle critique of the class structure that made such luxury possible and a celebration of the obvious artificiality of such staging practices. She manages to catalog the pleasures of these tourist destinations while also conveying a subtle wit and critique. She also develops the habit of constructing a clear structure in her documentaries, in this case, a structure based on chronology and the shifting styles in architecture, but she allows herself the freedom to digress. We see this mixture of structure and digression once again in her second commissioned documentary, Du Côté de la Côte. Here again, her role was to highlight the attractiveness of a certain region. So she documents dutifully the multiple spaces of the Riviera that evoke an image of the exotic, but she also pokes fun gently at the sunburned tourists. And she criticizes the kind of distance between what ordinary tourists can experience on the Côte d'Azur and what really wealthy people have access to, the private, gorgeous gardens. Above all, she uses this opportunity to experiment with an editing style based on graphic match, a kind of repetition of some quality, whether shape or light or color, from one shot to the next, and wordplay. She loves wordplay and exhibits this in all of her films. So in the following clip from Du Côté de la Côte, watch how she moves deftly from a discussion of Picasso to the sun, to I think a verbal mention of the sun, to sunburned tourists, and finally to sun hats.
On peut voir les peintures de Picasso. Peintre et céramiste, Picasso travaille toute l'année. Pour la peinture et la cuisson, on ne lui connaît sur la côte qu'un seul concurrent sérieux, le soleil. Le char du soleil surgit de l'eau. Il entraîne l'humanité dans sa course brûlante et la laisse comme morte pour, comme lui, renaître chaque matin et recommencer le cycle d'un lent travail qui exige de surmonter la pudeur et l'ennui, au risque d'y perdre la tête ou la peau, et dont le résultat se juge à ce qu'une blanche vaut une noire. Quand on en est là, il faut se couvrir. Et comme l'utile engendre le beau, le couvercle devient parure. Venus chercher le soleil, ils ont trouvé l'oubli. Où sont-ils? Ils sont loin. Loin de la côte, loin de partout. C'est ce que l'on appelle l'exotisme.
Okay. So she also made a third documentary in the late 1950s, but the production context of this documentary was quite different from the other two. It was called L'Opéra Mouffe, and it was self-produced. It was produced by Varda and conceived for an exhibition of experimental films in Brussels. There are, however, similarities between the documentaries. Once again, she creates a kind of travelogue, but replacing the castles and the beaches of the tourism documentaries is a busy street in Paris, the Rue Mouffetard, characterized in the 1950s as a region of a street full of substandard housing, poverty, alcoholism, but also community and fantasy. So here again, we have a structure, a film based upon the variety of activities and the people one could find on the Rue Mouffetard, spiked with digressions. The digressions take us to surprising places, including abstract images of vegetables and a fairy tale-like treatment of a romantic couple.
L'opéra mouffe au premier accord, au premier abord, c'est la bouffe.
Okay, so as you can see, that's not a typical kind of tourism documentary. So she does something in this film that she would develop in fits and starts over her career, and that is she represents herself. So she frames this study of poverty on the Rue Mouffetard with the words, notes from the diary of a pregnant woman. And then she includes that image of a nude pregnant woman. She was, in fact, pregnant with her first child, Rosalie, who produced the film that you're going to see today. And she made L'Opéra Mouffe in part to try to convey the mixture of plenitude and joy and also terror that condition can bring about. And so she uses that not as a kind of narcissistic way to explore her own little situation, but to establish a contrast between plenitude and poverty and joy that can be found out in the world. So in all of these documentaries made in the late 1960s, she avoids both the expository know-it-all style from the newsreel or from didactic films like The River by Pere Lorentz in the late 1930s. And she also avoids the looser observational style filmmaking methods that would be used by Frederick Wiseman, for example, in films like High School or Titicut Follies, or more recently, the methods used by Nicolas Philibert in To Be and to Have, that beautiful portrait of a year in the life of a small school. She avoids that. Instead, in To Be and to Have, the camera seems to just be observing the school children in this one school without commenting, obviously, on what is happening. That is not Varda's style. She foregrounds her authorial intervention. She experiments boldly and visibly with structure and style, all the while avoiding any kind of smug didacticism or the naive assumption that her documentaries convey the one and only truth about a given subject. We're closer to a type of documentary, sometimes called the essay film, that flourished in the post-war era in France. I think also it's quite possible that Varda's documentaries in this period were influenced by Jean Vigo. You may know of Jean Vigo's famous fiction film La Talente. He's a filmmaker who died very young, but had a huge impact on French film in the late 1920s and the early 1930s. He made a documentary called À propos de Nice in 1930, sort of with regard to Nice, I guess that would be called. And it's also kind of a tourist documentary, but with a twist. So what you're going to see in this clip is, well, you should know it's a film organized around the activities of tourists, wealthy tourists, and local workers who are preparing the city for a festival. So what you're going to see here is a montage of fashionable people relaxing on the boardwalk, kind of metamorphosing into a commentary on woman as fashion plate. So that film is traditionally considered a kind of an experimental documentary that is laced with surrealism. The second big phase of her documentary career I would characterize as, she takes on the role of a kind of politicized participant observer. In terms of her documentary practice, she developed some impulses while living in Los Angeles that were visible in her early work, but she also introduced new strategies. First, she extended that autobiographical intervention we saw in L'Opéra Mouffe in a film made in 1967 called Uncle Yanko. She had heard that a long-lost relative was living in Sausalito on a houseboat, and she had only 3 days left in her trip before she was heading back to France, but she decided to go there and meet him, and she was charmed by him. And so over the course of 3 days, she created this portrait of him, Jean Yanko Varda, her second cousin. Watch how she handles her first meeting with her Uncle Yanko.
Varda!
Monsieur Varda? I'm bringing someone who would like to meet you, Agnes Varda.
Agnes. Agnes. You should the daughter of Eugène? Vous êtes la fille d'Eugène Varda?
Oui, c'est vrai.
You are the daughter of Eugène Varda?
Yes, sir.
Is he called to Eugène Varda?
Scene C8, take two.
He called to Varda? To Eugène?
Sound.
Vous êtes la fille.
Scene
Vous êtes
C8.
the daughter of Eugène Varda?
Coupe. Scene C12.
C'est moi qui me suis souvent demandé. Quand j'ai lu le livre de Mina Yatir,
La même chose. Hein?
c'est
Je voudrais que tu sois juste gâté. Alors, tu es ma nièce. Tu es
bon, oui, on déteste. Bon, coupe.
So after this witty acknowledgement of the staging practices in documentary, she goes on to celebrate quite sincerely the life and the work of her second cousin, who is a collage artist. Uncle Yanko, at only 19 minutes, was a whimsical, brief essay, but on her next extended trip to California, she once again profiles artists and art making, this time in a feature-length exploration of mural art in Los Angeles called Murmure. Now, much of this film documents Chicano mural art, and it also explores the impact of gangs on that culture. But Varda profiles other artists too, including a woman who has started an art program for children who have been incarcerated. In the clip I'm going to show you from Murmure, she celebrates a Chicano rock group, a band, while showing us some of the graffiti in the neighborhood.
Check, 1, 2.
So I'm not sure if you could hear the lyrics, but he was like, is this the price we have to pay for coming to the USA? We work, we pay our taxes. Kind of a lament of the immigrant. Now, another documentary Varda made while living in California, Black Panthers, might seem an oddity in her documentary practice because it is a fairly straightforward expository documentary. There is no obvious staging, no repetitious introductions like what we saw in Uncle Yanko. There is no autobiographical intervention. She's not in the film, not even in voiceover. And there is no use of abstraction or irony or wit, as we've become accustomed to seeing in her films. Instead, the film documents with respect and sincerity black activism in Oakland in the late 1960s. The main event is an outdoor rally protesting the imprisonment of activist Huey Newton. So Varda filmed speeches and music performances, and she interviewed Newton in prison, employing classical documentary techniques such as the man in the street interview or the voice of God narration. But as the film progresses, an increasingly critical woman's voiceover, not her voice, an American woman, contemplates the impact of racism and police violence on black communities in America. There is also, in the film, a distinctive focus on the role of women in the movement. In the following clip, you will see Kathleen Cleaver, then the wife of Eldridge Cleaver, talking about the politics of hair.
This brother here, myself, all of us were born with our hair like this, and we just wear it like this because it's natural, because the reason for it, you might say, is like a new awareness among black people that their own natural appearance, physical appearance is beautiful and it's pleasing to them. The women want to please men, and if men accept it as beautiful, then women will do it.
Well, I decided to go natural about a week ago. I felt it was a purpose. It was a special purpose. More so a meaning for me to be natural, because I'm involved right now with the Black Panthers. And I think appearance means a lot.
Oh, I've been wearing it for about 3 years now, 3 or 4 years. But during that time, like, I went back to the straightening comb. But like wearing my natural, it like shows within me. It gives me more pride within myself.
For so many, many years, we were told that only white people were beautiful. Only straight hair, light eyes, light skin was beautiful. And so black women would try everything they could to straighten their hair and lighten their skin to look as much like white women. And the black men would let it be known that they thought white women were beautiful, and they'd say they didn't want any ugly black woman with short hair. This whole thing. But this has changed because black people are aware now that their own appearance is beautiful, they're proud of it, and white people are aware of it too, because white people now want natural wigs. They want wigs like this. Dig it? Isn't it beautiful? All right.
So the form of Black Panthers may be conventional, but her demonstration of support for black civil rights and for her acknowledgement of the role of women renders the film distinctive, and it really marks an important role in Varda's own emerging political consciousness. Back in Paris, she would make 2 overtly feminist films in 1975. One was called One Sings, the Other Doesn't, and it's an extraordinary film, unlike anything else she made. It's a folk musical about female friendship and reproductive freedom. You have a lot of lyrics about, the right for safe and affordable birth control. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's actually an incredible film. But it's so different from it's very direct and sincere, very different from some of her other films. She also made a short film called Réponse de Femmes, the response of women, or Women Respond, a 7-minute political essay that questions attitudes toward female sexuality, the female body, and motherhood. Let's take a look at Réponse de Femmes for a little moment on motherhood. This was commissioned for. So, whereas in L'Opéra Mouffe, the nude pregnant body is ambiguously linked to the evisceration of a pumpkin and to the fecundity of a busy market street in Paris, here it connotes unambiguous plenitude and joy. Indeed, throughout this very brief film, she unabashedly celebrates the female body, revealing it not through the codes of advertising or pornography, but in often quite humorous, direct address tableau of women who proclaim ownership over their bodies. The next stage in her documentary practice is one I think of as the stage of recycling, and this is a stage that has continued up till today. Really, she doesn't seem to drop any of her conventions or aesthetic commitments. She just adds more of them as time goes on. In 1982, Varda made a documentary called Ulysses, that is different from anything she had made before. With the 22-minute Ulysse, she starts to look back at her early work, notably a photograph she made in 1954. She contemplates the conditions of its production, and she speculates about its meaning, both for herself and its subjects. So she goes back and she interviews the people who were represented in this photograph. Let's take a look at Ulysse.
Mais cette photo-là, je m'en souviens pas, mais je me souviens que tu faisais souvent des photos de choses crevées sur les galets. Je me souviens en particulier d'un oiseau. Je me souviens que tu nous avais fait poser sans nos vêtements. Ça te faisait plaisir, mais autrement, je me souviens de rien. Et timide, sachant pas comment se tenir, comment faire. Quand tu me disais non comme ci, non comme ça. Il ne faisait pas de beaux paysages. Et c'était
Des choses de rêverie, oui.
Moi aussi, j'aime bien regarder la mer. Tu vois, je regardais la mer, j'attendais que ça se passe. J'étais bien content de remettre les habits et voilà.
Et ce portrait de toi habillé, tu te souviens?
Non, ça je ne me souviens pas du tout. Pas du tout.
So he was nude in the original photograph, and somehow she got him to take off his clothes again for this interview. Not really sure how that happened. So this strategy of recycling is not simply a way for Varda to celebrate her past achievements. It allows her to think on film about the nature of her art and how it fits into her life, the lives of her subjects, or the work's subjects, and also history. She interviews the subjects of the photograph she took in 1954, but they scarcely remember the shoot, and they cannot illuminate its meaning. She moves outward from the limited sphere of that one image, and she recounts the life of the people in her courtyard at the time. We see still images of her neighbors and of Varda herself as a much younger woman. She also reminds us of what was going on in France at that time. France's place in Indochina was shifting. There was the rise of the singer Yves Montand and the fall of another French singer, Edith Piaf, the decline of Piaf. But we're left with uncertainty. The photograph taken in 1954 means more to Varda than to its subjects and reflects nothing of its historical moment. Nevertheless, the still image of the boy, the man, and the dead goat return in her feature-length autobiographical film, The Beaches of Agnes. In the scene I'm going to show you next, she moves from an interview of the widow of the theater director, Jean Villard, to an oil painting of the sea. The widow of Jean Villard is reciting a poem about the sea, and then we go to a painting of the sea, and then to that photograph, once again from 1954, which includes, a man looking at the sea. So let's take a look at Beaches of Agnes.
Entre les tombes, midi le juste y compose de feu, la mer, toujours recommencer.
Tout homme qui regarde la mer est un Ulysse qui n'a pas toujours envie de revenir à la maison. Tous les enfants que j'aime et tous les hommes qui regardent la mer s'appellent Ulysse. Adolescente, je rêvassais.
So, the the scene, like so many in her feature-length autobiographical documentary, Beaches of Agnès, eschews nostalgia in favor of an emphasis on her current work. So we may go back to that person she knew, the widow of Jean Villard. We may look once again at that photograph made in 1954, but it's as a way to launch her new work. She's making an installation on that beach in the shape of a whale, and she, enlists another nude man with that. And then she makes this, then we're often running to a segment on the circus. She, wanted to see trapeze artists performing in front of the ocean, and so she created that. So recycling would become a strategy for Varda. From The Gleaners and I, to her installations, to Beaches of Agnès, her early photographs and her filmography serve as an endlessly rich source of images for her new work, and a tool for thinking about art, memory, and history. My last stage that I want to explain today has to do with her later documentaries beginning in 2000. Since 2000, Varda has made 5 additional ambitious documentaries. All have a clear structure marked by digressions. All rely heavily upon Varda's characteristic investment in place, and most are structured around a journey. But all of these works reveal a distinct intensification of that autobiographical element. Varda's presence has expanded in her late work, on screens and in voiceover. In The Gleaners and I, she travels around France, interviewing scavengers of all kinds, artists, homeless people. But she also writes herself into the history of gleaning.
Mais ça, je vais y revenir plus tard. Et on est arrivé dans la ville d'Arras, on a vu sa place, on a vu son musée, et la glaneuse de Jules Breton. L'autre glaneuse, celle du titre de ce documentaire, c'est moi. Je laisse volontiers tomber les épis de blé pour prendre la caméra. Ces nouvelles petites caméras, elles sont numériques, fantastiques, elles permettent des effets stroboscopiques, des effets narcissiques et même hyper réalistiques.
I think it's my favorite clip in all of her documentary films, right there. I love that forthright gesture of her, dropping the wheat and picking up that camera. She has been representing herself for a long time, as we already know. Back in 1954, her first official self-portrait was this mosaic. She found her look and she stuck with it, right? This haircut. In 1960, she sort of inserted herself into a painting by Bellini, kind of situating herself in profile, like the men in the image. We already have talked about her nude body in Le Parent Mouffes. In 2003, she made this photograph. She's surrounded by potatoes, which was the theme of an installation she made for the Venice Biennale in 2003, Patatutopia, which sort of evokes potatoes and utopia. Here's the poster for her autobiographical feature-length documentary, The Beaches of Agnès. Here she's in a caricature. She's been made into a caricature by her friend Christophe Vallot, who helped with a lot of one of her most ambitious works in the last decade has been a suite of installations she exhibited at the Cartier Foundation in 2006. Each installation of the show, which was called L'Île et Elle, the island and she, each installation is devoted in some way to Noirmoutier, an island off the coast of Normandy, where Varda and Jacques Demy lived for part of each year. The most elaborate installation was called The Widows of Noirmoutier, and it's comprised of 14 screens, which include documentaries, little mini documentaries about the women who live on this island and who have lost their husbands. But also she has rethought the screen in the sense of, a screen is not just one thing. It can be 14, and you can put a 35 millimeter image in the center of them. So she's multiplying screens and combining different formats, video and 35 millimeter. Installations have allowed Varda to rethink the proliferation of screens, for example, but also the movement of the spectator. She has here designed a space that invited viewers to choose a chair, put on a headset that corresponded to an individual widow's story, and listen to the story before moving on to another chair and another story. Here's another example of the work that she made for this installation, for this suite of installations. This is called the Triptych of Noirmoutier, and you could sit down and just look at this 6-minute loop of domestic activity, or you could open the screens and you could watch, like people in the kitchen could move off screen, as it were. And eventually the older woman moves off screen right into a room containing a china cabinet. It's hard to explain this work, but it was another instance of multiplying the screens. Getting back to the idea of her autobiographical representation, here she is. She aligns herself with the circus people in her own autobiography. But also in this Widows of Noirmoutier installation, she herself is, of course, a widow of Noirmoutier. She lost her husband, Jacques Demy, in 1990, and she represents herself. But she distinguishes herself. She can't really interview herself, or chooses not to. But so what she does is represent herself as a widow by simply showing an empty chair next to her, emphasizing the absence of Jacques Demy in her life. It's a rare moment of real melancholy in Varda's work. I would say there are two moments of extreme melancholy in Varda's work. There's this and also the film Documentaire, which is a fiction film imbued with a lot of documentary images about a single woman living in Los Angeles in the late 70s, raising a child on her own after a breakup from her partner, which was exactly her situation. Varda is omnipresent in these late films, and yet she has not created traditional autobiographical documentaries. For one thing, she resists the tell-all narrative about family secrets. And she certainly has them, but she resists that impulse. And for another, she questions whether it is even possible or productive to draw on one's past to illuminate the present. Let's take a look at a clip from Beaches of Agnès, in which she questions the very enterprise of autobiographical expression.
Conçue dans la ville d'Arles, on m'a nommée Arlette. À 18 ans, j'ai changé de prénom, j'ai choisi Agnès, et je l'ai fait enregistrer au greffe du tribunal.
T'as pas de nostalgie de ton enfance?
Non, pas du tout. Mais j'ai du plaisir à en voir les images. Parce qu'on a été 5 enfants, mais je me souviens surtout d'être la petite des 3 premiers. Après, j'ai été la grande des 2 derniers. Je me sentais au milieu, bien indépendante. Tout le monde dit que l'enfance est fondatrice de la structure, je ne sais pas quoi. Je n'ai pas beaucoup de rapport à mon enfance. C'est pas une référence pour les choses auxquelles je pense. C'est pas une inspiration. Enfin, je ne sais pas. Alors moi, je rêve de voir une petite fille porter ce maillot de bain rayé et aussi porter un autre avec des grandes bretelles.
Alors, je vais acheter celle-là. C'est combien?
3 poignées.
Je ne sais pas. Je ne sais pas ce que c'est de reconstituer une scène comme ça. Est-ce que ça fait revivre ce temps-là? Pour moi, c'est du cinéma, c'est un jeu.
Est-ce que tu te doutais que 70 ans plus tard, tu ferais une installation avec des fleurs en papier crépon et des
Est-ce que tu es obligé de me rappeler l'âge que j'ai? Côté maison d'enfance, c'est de tout.
So her childhood is not an inspiration to her, and certainly not the key to the person that she became. So implicitly, the film asks us, to rethink, like, what is an autobiographical documentary? What does it mean to tell your story? I want to show you a clip of another autobiographical film made by Varda's contemporary and friend, Jean-Luc Godard. Godard also made an autobiographical film. In 1995, he made a film called JLG by JLG. Godard haunts Faces, Places, in a way, today's film. And so I want to take the time to show you a kind of lengthy clip of his autobiography. It reveals a parallel to Varda's self-portrait, but also it has a significant difference in tone, I think, that helps foreground why Varda's work is so pleasurable. Let's look at the opening of JLG by JLG.
Exercice 174. Procéder la distribution des rôles. Commencer les répétitions. Résoudre les problèmes de mise en scène. Régler soigneusement les entrées et les sorties. Apprendre son rôle par cœur. Travailler, améliorer son interprétation. Entrer dans la peau de son personnage. Avoir un rôle de... Faire la répétition ou la générale, donner la première représentation, aboutir selon un succès, un triomphe, ou au contraire, un échec, un four.
L'espoir lui appartenait, mais voilà, le garçon ignorait que l'important est de savoir à qui il appartenait, lui. Quelle puissance ténébreuse était en droit de le réclamer, lui.
So Godard also is questioning the possibility of a transparent and truthful chronicle of one's life, suggesting in a whispered, cryptic voiceover that making a self-portrait requires casting, rehearsal, role-playing, and attention to the box office. Both Varda and Godard reject a simplistic notion of self-representation by emphasizing the tactics required to construct a version of oneself. But Godard works in a very different emotional register than Varda. His film is mournful and philosophical, while Varda's late work focuses on her connections with other people and on the ways in which she can build on her previous work to explore new aesthetic problems. Most of the late documentaries made by Varda, in fact, show her at work, typically building installations, therefore letting us in on her process. Now, Faces, Places, the film you're going to see at 4 o'clock, extends Varda's earlier strategies in the making of documentaries. I will refrain from saying much about it because it's full of surprises and I want you to experience those. What's new here, though, is Varda co-directed this film with an artist named J.R. This kind of collaboration is absolutely unprecedented for this resolutely independent auteur. Just an anecdote, in 2007, someone started making a biographical documentary about Varda, and she was helping out, she was a willing participant in that. But after they shot the first scene on the beaches of Brussels, she wrested the project out of that person's hands and said, "This will not stand, I need to make the film." So she is resolutely independent, and she's the director. So why did she collaborate with this person, and what is the result? Initially, the two artists seem really different in their trajectories and preoccupations. J.R. actually began his artistic life as a graffiti artist at the age of 13. At the age of 17, he began posting his photographs, or rather photocopies of his photographs, on walls, creating a kind of sidewalk gallery of unauthorized images in public places. He first caught the public's attention in 2005 when he was 19 with this image. He had actually taken this photograph in 2004. It was part of Portrait of a Generation, his first project of large-scale pastings on the walls of poor neighborhoods. A French Malian man stands in front of a group of black children in a crumbling graffiti-decorated concrete building. The man looks directly at the camera and holds what appears to be a gun. Our first impulse is to think that we are seeing a confrontation between the photographer and a resident of an embattled banlieue. Look again, he's actually holding a video camera. The photograph was taken by JR of his friend and fellow artist, Laj Lee, in a suburban housing project called Les Bosquets. Lee had grown up in Les Bosquets, and the two had met at a collective of the makers of short films called Court Jamais. Lee had shot footage of police brutality in his neighborhood that eventually resulted in the arrest of policemen. Now, in 2005, a year after JR and Lee took this photo, they collaborated on it, riots broke out in Les Bosquets in protest of the death of two boys who were electrocuted in an electric substation while they were fleeing the police. In television footage of the riots, the image and others created by JR and Lee, still pasted on the wall, drew the attention of journalists. JR was actually offered a job by a news outlet, but he turned it down and instead went back to the neighborhood, reconnected with his friend Lee and the subjects of their images, and he created new photographs precisely of those who had rioted. And he asked the subjects to make funny faces. They don't look scary or forbidding. He said he wanted to make them look neither like angels nor devils, but, like human beings. He put these images up illegally in prosperous neighborhoods all over Paris, eliciting criticism from the authorities. But later that same year, the city of Paris had invited him to exhibit the photos, and he was on his way. He continues to create large, site-specific ephemeral images of faces on buildings in neighborhoods marked by poverty and conflict. He remains relatively anonymous and eschews corporate sponsorship. Here are some of his projects. In 2007, he put up this show in the Middle East, which explores the day-to-day lives of people on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He created and displayed, once again illegally, photographs of people on both sides of the wall who have the same profession: barbers, grocers, security guards, athletes, professors, and school kids. In 2008, he traveled to a poor neighborhood in Rio and lived for a period of time in its oldest favela. He created photographs of people's eyes in an attempt to draw attention to the inhabitants' humanity, following a horrific string of killings by drug dealers and the police. And here, I put this image up because I wanted to show that one of his goals is to work with people who live in these neighborhoods, not just come in from the outside and impose his vision on them. Not all of the work is about marginalized people in difficult conditions. A few years ago, he made the glass pyramids of I. M. Pei at the Louvre disappear, thanks to the creation of adhesive black and white images of the structure behind it. So watch out for your own pyramids by I. M. Pei. They could disappear. In 2009, he started another large-scale, multi-nation photography project called Women Are Heroes. That existed from 2008 to 2014. It took him to Kenya, Liberia, Vietnam, and beyond, with the goal of emphasizing women's dignity and underscoring their pivotal roles in society. Here in Kenya, he put the eyes and the faces of women from the slums of Kibera on their rooftops using water-resistant material that had the additional benefit of protection from the rain. A few months ago, he made this installation. It's a one-year-old Mexican boy peeking over the fence into the United States. It's on the border of U.S. and Mexico. For the moment, unaware of the politics of borders. Kind of a poignant image in this moment of the arguments over DACA. In 2011, JR was sponsored by the TED Talk organization, and he chose to create a global participatory project called Inside Out, which involved inviting people. He wanted to downplay his role as a photographer in this project, so he asked people all around the world to send him images that they had taken of themselves, and he would print them. He would cover the costs of printing these gigantic building-size images in many cases, and he would help them paste them up. So the work has inspired group expressions on themes such as hope, diversity, gender-based violence, and climate change. This image is from Standing Rock, North Dakota. It's one of 80 images created by the members of the Lakota tribe on the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. So Inside Out has elicited a lot of participation. Over 260,000 people have been involved in this project in more than 129 countries. So it's just huge. I think the book documenting this project just came out this week, by the way, Inside Out. So the collaboration in Faces Places between Varda and JR might seem unlikely, but it's really not. JR creates images and pastes them on walls, often in places of conflict, asserting the visibility and the humanity of various communities. Varda was already exploring mural art made by outsiders in Murmure back in the late 1970s. JR represents women in quite specific ways. Varda has been thinking since the late 1950s about female representation. So together in Faces and Places, they foreground women's stories, worker stories, and they develop and document, their friendship. One of the most interesting things about this film is the representation of this friendship. Indeed, since the film has come out, here's Inside Out in Oakland, just as Varda went to Oakland to document political dissent, JR has been in Oakland documenting political dissent. Their friendship and the representation of it has had kind of a fascinating afterlife, notably on JR's Instagram account and on Agnes's Instagram account. She, of course, has an Instagram account. He is an Instagram sensation. He has, I think, like 1 million followers. So in the wake of the release of the film, more and more images keep getting generated of their friendship. I'll just show you a few. He's on the red carpet at the Cannes Film Festival. Their self-consciousness about their collaboration is rare but not unique. Let's take a look, if you'll allow me, one more clip from another film that tries to do the same thing. Chronicle of a Summer is a film about Parisians made in the summer of 1960. It was co-directed by Edgar Morin, who is a sociologist, and Jean Rouch, the anthropologist filmmaker. Near the end, both directors talk about whether they have achieved anything at all worthwhile. They had filmed the screening, the aftermath, the Q&A of a screening of A Rough Cut, and they had received a lot of criticism from the viewers about the film that we just saw.
Au début, si tu veux, je croyais que tout le monde allait être ému par ce film. Et de voir maintenant que des gens que j'aime beaucoup, comme Marie-Lou, comme Marceline, sont contestés, alors moi ça me gêne, ça m'embête. Je croyais que les spectateurs allaient aimer les personnages que j'aimais.
Bon, autrement dit, nous avons voulu faire un film d'amour et on aboutit à une sorte de film d'indifférence. Mais en tout cas, dans lequel, non pas d'indifférence, un film de réaction, et de réaction qui n'est pas forcément une réaction sympathique.
C'est la difficulté de communiquer quelque chose. Nous sommes dans le bain.
Est-ce que vous êtes heureuse?
This film, Chronicle of a Summer, is about the making of the film, but it's also about the lives of workers, the impact of the Algerian War, and the Holocaust. Faces Places likewise renders visible the lives of those who typically remain out of sight. It reminds us of the dignity of labor, and above all, it supplies a guide for how to navigate the world with one's curiosity and empathy intact. I'll leave you with a quote by the New York Times film critic A.O. Scott, who characterized the experience of watching this film with unusual eloquence. He says, "Once you have seen Faces Places, you will want to keep it with you like a talisman or a souvenir. Wherever you're going, it will surely come in handy." Thank you.